My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and before the accident, I used to believe I had a close-knit family. I thought loyalty ran in our blood. But that illusion shattered the night my car spun across a rain-slicked highway and crashed into a concrete divider. The world went white for a moment, metal crumpling, glass shattering, and the shrill sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I don't remember how long I was unconscious. When I woke up, the sterile smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of machines filled the room. My right leg was wrapped in layers of bandages, and a steel rod held my thigh together. I turned my head toward the door, expecting to see Mom rushing in, maybe with Dad right behind her, their eyes red with worry. But there was no one. Just in four-line, a flickering fluorescent light, and the unsettling quiet of being alone. The nurse came in, her voice soft. "You're lucky to be alive, sweetheart. That was a bad accident. Has anyone been here?" I asked, my throat dry. She hesitated. "Not yet, but maybe they're on their way?" I smiled weakly. "Yeah, maybe." They weren't. Hours turned into days. My phone buzzed twice, both from coworkers checking in. My family group chat was silent. My mother, Linda, always had a reason to be busy: book club, yoga, social dinners. My father, Greg, usually just followed her lead. My younger sister, Megan, was the golden child. Perfect job, perfect fiancé, perfect life. I was the one who'd always been a little too emotional, too ambitious, too different. By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I called home. Mom picked up on the second ring. Her tone was sharp, businesslike. "Oh, Emily, I heard about your accident. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm in pain, but I'm managing. I just thought." "I'm glad you're all right," she interrupted. "But, things have been hectic here. Megan's engagement dinner is next week, and we've been planning nonstop. I'll try to come by after that." I stared at the phone, stunned. "After that?" "Sweetheart, you'll be fine. You're a strong girl," she said, almost dismissively. "Anyway, I have to go. Megan's here. We'll call you later, okay?" The line went dead before I could answer. That night, I cried quietly into my hospital pillow. I told myself not to be surprised. This wasn't new. My family had always treated me like I was inconvenient. Growing up, I was the dreamer, the one who wanted to write, travel, create something meaningful. They wanted practical, reliable, predictable. Megan became a lawyer. I became a freelance journalist. You can imagine which of us they bragged about at family dinners. Still, I never thought they'd actually abandon me when I needed them most. 2 weeks later, the doctors discharged me. I could barely walk with crutches, but there was no one to pick me up. I called my dad out of desperation. "Dad, can you drive me home?" "I can't," he sighed. "Emily, you know how your mother feels about you staying here right now. Things are tense." "Tense? I just got out of the hospital. Your mother says you bring unnecessary stress. Megan's wedding plans are in full swing, and she doesn't want drama." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Drama?" I almost died. His voice dropped. "You know how she is, Em. I'll try to talk to her, but maybe you can stay with a friend for a bit." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. My hands shook as I called a cab with the little cash I had left. When I arrived home, my own tiny apartment that I'd been struggling to afford, it hit me how fragile my independence really was. My medical bills had drained my savings, my freelance clients had paused contracts, and I could barely move without pain shooting up my leg. The first few days were a blur of exhaustion. I learned how to cook sitting down, how to balance on one crutch while washing dishes, how to hide the growing panic that I might not make rent next month. I reached out again, one last attempt. "Mom, I just need help for a few weeks," I said on the phone, my voice trembling. "I'll pay you back once I can work again. Please." She sighed dramatically. "Emily, we've helped you so many times before. You're almost 30. It's time you learned responsibility. You can't expect us to fix your life every time you make a mess." "A mess?" I whispered. "This wasn't my fault." "Well, life happens. You can't depend on us forever." Her words cut deep. It wasn't just the rejection. It was the coldness. The total lack of empathy. After that call, I stopped reaching out. Something inside me hardened. I realized my family would never see me as anything more than the black sheep, the one who failed to live up to their standards. But the world has a strange way of shifting when you least expect it. One evening, as I was sorting through medical paperwork, I got a call from an unknown number. It was a lawyer. "Ms. Carter," he said. "I'm calling about an inheritance matter involving your late grandmother, Margaret Carter." I blinked, confused. My grandmother had died 6 months earlier. I hadn't even been invited to the funeral. "What kind of inheritance?" I asked cautiously. "She left specific assets in your name. We'll need you to come to the office to review the documents." When I finally sat in that lawyer's office, surrounded by old oak furniture and the faint scent of lemon polish, I felt like I was in a dream. My grandmother, my dad's mother, had always been the only one who treated me kindly. She used to tell me I reminded her of herself, strong-willed, independent, unwilling to conform. "She left her estate to you," the lawyer said, sliding a folder across the table. "Her home, her savings, and her trust account." I just stared at him. "All to me?"
Yes.
"Everything." "There's a personal note inside the file." I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat as I read her familiar handwriting. "Emily, I've seen how your parents treat you. Don't let them make you small. This is my way of giving you the freedom you deserve. Build something for yourself. Live without apology." Tears blurred my vision. I pressed the note to my chest and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." It was more than money, it was validation.
Someone saw me.
Someone believed I was worth investing in. Over the next few months, I began to heal physically and emotionally. I moved into my grandmother's old house, a beautiful 2-story home on the edge of town. I used part of the inheritance to start a small community publication, the Hearth Journal, a platform for local voices, stories, and social issues. For the first time in years, I felt alive. But life has a funny way of circling back. It wasn't long before my parents came knocking again, this time needing something from me. They didn't expect that the girl they'd once called a burden would be the one sitting behind a mahogany desk when the truth about them came out. And when the day came that the judge said my name, their faces told me everything I'd ever wanted to know about justice. When I woke up in the hospital, the first thing I felt wasn't pain, it was confusion. My body was numb, my thoughts foggy, and for a brief moment, I didn't even remember what had happened. Then I saw the 4 in my arm, the white bandages around my left leg, and the dull, heavy ache in my ribs. The nurse smiled when she saw me stir. "You're awake, sweetheart," she said softly, adjusting the blanket. "You've been out for 2 days. You were lucky the paramedics found you when they did." 2 days. My brain scrambled to piece things together. The rain,
The car.
the headlights, the crash. And then, like a stab of reality, my family. "Where are they?" I croaked, my voice rough from disuse. "My mom, my dad, my sister. Are they here?" The nurse's smile faltered just a little. She checked my chart before replying, "We tried calling your emergency contact, but no one answered. Would you like us to try again?" No one answered. I felt the first real sting then, not from the broken ribs or the bruised leg, but from something far deeper. My family always claimed to be close. My mother used to say, "We're a team, Hannah." Always. But when I needed them the most, they weren't there. I tried to tell myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe they didn't get the message. Maybe my phone was damaged and they couldn't reach me. Maybe, just maybe, there was still some part of them that cared. By the 3rd day, the nurse came in again with a hesitant expression. "Your discharge is ready," she said gently. I blinked at her. "Already?"
But
"I can't walk properly yet." She gave a sympathetic look. "Your insurance only covers 3 days of inpatient care, and your family didn't authorize the extension." That sentence landed like a gut punch. "My family?" "Yes, dear. We tried to contact them again." "Your mother said," the nurse hesitated, as if she hated what she had to repeat. "She said you'll have to manage on your own now. That you're an adult." It felt like my chest had cracked open. I just stared at her, unable to speak. The nurse touched my shoulder lightly, her eyes full of pity. Do you have somewhere to go? I didn't answer. Because, honestly, I didn't. When they finally rolled me out in a wheelchair and handed me a plastic bag with my torn clothes and broken phone, the world outside the hospital looked grayer than I remembered. Cold drizzle misted against my face. The cab driver loaded my bag without a word, and I gave him my home address out of pure instinct, before realizing halfway there that I didn't even know if I'd be welcome. When we pulled into the familiar driveway, my stomach twisted. The house looked exactly the same. The hydrangeas Mom loved were still blooming by the porch. The front window still had that chipped corner I'd promised to fix. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe there was a misunderstanding. But as I limped up to the door and knocked, my mom's face appeared through the glass panel, and the look she gave me told me everything I needed to know. She didn't open the door right away. Just stood there, arms crossed, lips pressed thin. Then, finally, she cracked it open a few inches. Hannah. Her tone was flat.
Cold.
You shouldn't have come here. My throat tightened. Mom. I didn't have anywhere else to go. I just got discharged. I know, she interrupted. The hospital called me. Then why didn't you come? Her eyes flicked over my crutches, my bandaged leg, my hospital wristband, and yet there wasn't an ounce of softness in her expression. Because we can't do this again, she said simply. You've always been dramatic, Hannah. Always needing attention, always in trouble. We can't keep rescuing you. Rescuing me? I whispered, disbelief choking me. Mom, I almost died. She didn't answer. Behind her, I heard my sister's voice. Emily, my golden, perfect sister. Is that her? She called, her tone sharp. Don't let her in, Mom. You know how she is. The sound of my own family rejecting me from the other side of the door was something I'll never forget. Please, I tried again, tears stinging my eyes. Just for tonight. I have nowhere to. No, Mom said firmly, cutting me off. You need to learn responsibility. Maybe this will finally make you grow up. And with that, she closed the door. The click of the lock echoed in the rain like a final judgment. I stood there for what felt like hours, my crutches sinking slightly into the wet gravel, the chill seeping through my hospital clothes. My body hurt in ways I didn't think possible, but nothing compared to the hollowness inside me. Eventually, I made my way down the street, trying to think of anywhere I could go. Friends? No, most of them were my family's friends too, and I didn't want them to know how pathetic I looked. My apartment? I'd sublet it months ago when Mom insisted I move back home to save money. Ironic. That night, I ended up at a cheap roadside motel, one of those places that smell like stale smoke and regret. The clerk didn't even look up when I handed him the crumpled bills I had left in my wallet. When I finally lay down on the rough sheets, the pain in my leg flared again, and for the first time since the accident, I broke down completely. Not the quiet kind of crying, but the full, ugly sobs that make your whole body shake. I cried for the car accident. I cried for the bruises, the fear, the humiliation. But mostly, I cried for them. Because even after everything, after being left to rot in a hospital bed, after being kicked out like a stray dog, some part of me still loved them. And that was the worst pain of all. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating weakly beside me. The cracked screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. When I answered, a woman's voice said, "Hi, is this Hannah Cooper? I'm calling from Brightwell Insurance." Insurance.
Right.
The hospital had mentioned something about the claim being delayed. Yes, I said hoarsely.
Great.
I'm just calling to confirm a few details regarding your accident. We've been reviewing the report, and there are some discrepancies we'd like to clarify. Discrepancies? My heart picked up. What kind of discrepancies? Well, she said, tapping keys in the background, according to the police report, the car that hit you is registered to a Mr. Thomas Reed. Does that name sound familiar? It took me a second to process it. Thomas Reed? Yes, ma'am. The vehicle's owner filed a claim 2 days before the incident, noting the car had been lent to a family member. We're trying to verify who was driving that night. My stomach turned to ice.
Wait.
You're saying the car that hit me was borrowed by someone in my family? There was a pause. That's what it appears, yes. We'll know more once we receive the full report. After the call ended, I sat there staring at my phone, my pulse hammering in my ears. The rain outside the motel window had stopped, but it still felt like a storm was raging inside me. Someone in my family had been behind that wheel, and they'd said nothing. I wanted to dismiss it, to tell myself it was a coincidence, but deep down, something cold and certain told me it wasn't. My mom's detached reaction. My sister's insistence that I not come home. Their refusal to answer the hospital's calls. It all fit together like jagged puzzle pieces forming one horrifying picture. That night, I went through my things, searching for my old phone. Miraculously, it still worked when plugged in. My hands shook as I scrolled through my messages, and then I found it. A text from my sister, timestamped 2 hours before the crash. "Where are you? Mom's car is acting weird, and I don't want to take mine. I'll swing by if you're still out." A second message followed 10 minutes later. "Forget it. I'll just take Tom's car. He said it's fine." My breath caught.
Tom.
Thomas Reed. Her boyfriend. The same name the insurance lady mentioned. My sister had been driving. And they all knew. That realization hit me like a second collision. Only this time, it wasn't metal and glass. It was betrayal. They hadn't just abandoned me after the accident. They were covering it up. For hours, I sat there in silence, staring at that message, feeling something shift inside me. The sadness that had been suffocating me for days began to twist into something sharper. Not rage, not yet, but the beginning of something colder, something that wanted the truth, no matter how much it hurt. If Emily had hit me that night, if my own sister had left me broken in the street and pretended to be innocent, then maybe my mother's cruelty wasn't just about disappointment. Maybe it was guilt. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I wasn't the helpless one. Because if my family thought I was too broken to fight back, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the headlights again, but this time, I saw my sister's face behind the wheel. Emily. My perfect, adored, can-do-no-wrong sister. I used to think the worst pain was physical, the snap of a bone, the sting of a wound, but emotional pain? It lingers. It whispers in your ear when you try to rest. It tells you that everything you believed about love and family was a lie. By sunrise, I was sitting at the edge of the motel bed, holding my phone like a weapon. I opened that text again and again, reading every word until it burned into my brain. She had taken Tom's car. She'd been near my route that night. She never called for help. And then she vanished. I needed proof. Real proof. I called Brightwell Insurance back that morning. "Hi, this is Hannah Cooper," I said, trying to sound calm. "I was in an accident a few days ago. You called me about some discrepancies?" "Yes," the woman said politely. "We're still investigating, but the initial findings show the vehicle involved was indeed registered to Mr. Thomas Reed. There's also traffic cam footage, though it hasn't been fully processed yet." Traffic footage. My pulse quickened. Would it be possible to see it? "I'm afraid that's restricted for now," she replied. "Only law enforcement or the insured parties can access it. But once the investigation clears, you'll receive a copy of the final report." I thanked her, hung up, and immediately opened my laptop. If I couldn't get it officially, I'd find another way. Hours passed as I scoured local news reports, traffic updates, police blotters, anything that might mention the crash. There wasn't much, but then I found it, a small, 2-sentence note on a local blog. Late-night collision near Oak Ridge and 7th. Victim identified as 27-year-old woman, sustained serious injuries. The driver fled the scene before authorities arrived. Hit and run. That phrase hit me harder than the car ever had. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the comments under the post, mostly strangers gossiping, but one caught my attention. Did anyone see the black Honda with the dented front bumper that night? Looked like it turned down Pine. Tom drove a black Honda. I copied everything, screenshots, timestamps, even the URL, and saved them in a folder I titled Truth. My hands shook as I typed the name. It felt like the first step toward reclaiming my voice. But as much as I wanted to confront them right then, I knew I couldn't. Not yet. My body was still weak. my emotions too raw. I needed time. Time to heal. Time to think. Time to let them believe I was broken and harmless.
So I stayed quiet.
For weeks, I limped between hospital checkups and the motel room. The air always smelled faintly of bleach and loneliness. Sometimes, I'd sit by the window just watching the cars go by, wondering how many drivers noticed the world outside their windshield. Wondering if Emily ever thought of me when she drove. She didn't visit. None of them did. But that didn't stop me from watching them. I borrowed an old tablet from a neighbor in the motel and used it to look up my mom's social media. Her posts were cheerful. Pictures of brunches, family dinners, Emily smiling with her boyfriend Tom. The same Tom whose car had hit me. In one photo, dated 2 days after the crash, Emily was holding a glass of champagne, her arm around Mom. The caption read, "So proud of my strong girl. Love conquers everything." I nearly dropped the tablet. Love conquers everything. Was that their way of celebrating? Of pretending nothing had happened? Something hardened inside me that day. I realized that if I wanted the truth to come out, I couldn't beg for it. I had to build it, piece by piece, until they couldn't deny it anymore. The first step was getting close again. A month later, once I was walking without crutches, I showed up at my parents' house. Not to plead, not to cry, but to look them in the eye. Mom opened the door and froze. "Hannah." I smiled tightly. "Hey, Mom."
Can we talk?
Her lips pressed together. "Now's not a good time." "I'll make it quick," I said, stepping forward before she could shut me out. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything. I know things have been tense. I've been thinking, maybe I overreacted." Her eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion flickering, but she relaxed just enough. "Well," she said carefully, "it's good you're reflecting. Your sister's been under a lot of stress too. The wedding plans haven't been easy." Wedding? It was like she'd punched me again. Emily's getting married?
Yes.
To Tom, of course. You'd know that if you hadn't disappeared. I bit down on the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood.
Tom.
The man whose car had crushed me. The man my sister was going to marry. I forced a shaky smile. "That's great news. I'm happy for her." Mom nodded, clearly relieved I wasn't arguing. "Good. Maybe it's time we all move on." She said it like she was doing me a favor. Like the wound in my body and the betrayal in my heart could just be erased with one polite conversation. But I kept smiling. Because now I had what I needed, an invitation back into their world. Over the next few weeks, I showed up more often. I brought groceries. I pretended to be fine. I laughed when Emily made snide remarks about my dramatic recovery. I let Mom talk about floral arrangements and cake tastings while I quietly recorded her every word. And then one afternoon, I got my break. Emily and I were sitting at the kitchen table, the late sun slanting through the window. She was scrolling through her phone, half listening as I talked about physical therapy. Then she sighed. "You know," she said casually, "you really messed things up for everyone that night." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "If you hadn't been walking on that road like an idiot, maybe none of this would have happened." I froze. "You were there?" Her eyes flicked up, sharp and defensive. "I didn't say that." "Yes, you did." My voice was barely a whisper. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping the tile. "Drop it, Hannah. You don't know what you're talking about." "Then tell me what you're talking about," I said, my voice shaking. Her jaw clenched. "You should have stayed out of the road. That's all." And then she left the room. But it was too late. I'd recorded everything. That night, I listened to it over and over. Her words weren't a confession, not exactly, but they were enough. Enough to prove she knew. Enough to show the guilt that slipped through her perfect facade. I sent the audio to myself, saved a backup, and started drafting an email to Brightwell Insurance, to the local police, even to the local paper. But just as I was about to hit send, something stopped me. Revenge felt satisfying in theory, but the truth was, I didn't just want justice. I wanted understanding. I wanted to look into their faces when they realized what they'd done. I wanted them to see me not as the burden they threw away, but as the proof of their own cruelty. So, I decided to wait. The wedding was 2 weeks away. And if my sister wanted to start her happily ever after built on lies, I would make sure the truth walked right down the aisle with her. Over the next days, I prepared quietly. I got a small audio transmitter, the kind that could connect to a speaker or a microphone. I practiced walking again, until my limp was barely noticeable. I even bought a new dress, soft blue, simple, elegant. Something that said I survived. When the wedding day came, I didn't wait for an invitation. I arrived just as the ceremony was about to start. The guests turned to stare as I walked down the aisle, not in a gown, not in white, but in defiance. My sister's smile faltered the second she saw me. Mom's face went pale. "Hannah," she hissed, standing up. "What are you doing here?" I smiled sweetly. "Just came to celebrate." Tom's expression flickered between confusion and fear. Emily's hand trembled on his arm, and when the officiant began to speak, I reached into my purse and pressed a single button. The speakers crackled, and then Emily's voice filled the hall. "If you hadn't been walking on that road like an idiot, maybe none of this would have happened." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily froze, her face draining of color. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, watching as the truth, the thing they tried so hard to bury, finally came to light. Mom whispered something frantically to Emily, but it was too late. Guests were already murmuring, phones were recording, and Tom looked like he'd seen a ghost. For the first time since the accident, I felt steady.
Whole.
Not because I'd humiliated them, not because I'd won, but because I finally stopped hiding. That day, they saw me not as the broken girl they discarded, but as the mirror reflecting their own sins. And in their silence, I found peace. Silence. That was the first thing that hit me after the playback ended, not the sound of footsteps or gasps or apologies. Just silence. A suffocating, heavy stillness that wrapped around the room like fog. Emily's mouth opened, then closed again. Her face was pale, her eyes darting between me and Tom like she was searching for an escape hatch that didn't exist. Mom was the first to recover. "Turn that off," she hissed, her voice trembling. "This is a wedding, for God's sake." "It was," I said softly. "Now it's the truth." I could hear murmurs spreading through the guests. Words like hit and run, accident, cover-up floated through the air like smoke. Someone in the back whispered, "Isn't that her sister?" Emily took a step forward, her hands shaking. You don't know what you're doing, Hannah." "Oh, I do," I replied, my voice low and calm. "For months, you all made me think I was nothing, that I was the burden you had to get rid of. You left me bleeding on the side of a road, and still found a way to make me the problem. But look at you now." I gestured around the hall, the guests frozen in their chairs, the photographer's camera still raised mid-shot, the officiant standing awkwardly with his hands folded. "Look at how well your lies hold up under the light." Emily's lips trembled. "I didn't mean." "Don't." I cut her off, my voice shaking now. "Don't lie again." Mom stepped forward, her voice dripping with false composure. "Enough. This is not the place or time to air personal issues." "Then maybe you shouldn't have raised a daughter who ran someone over and pretended it didn't happen," I snapped. Gasps again. Someone dropped a glass. Tom's face had gone completely white. "What is she talking about?" he asked, looking between us. Emily turned toward him desperately. "Tom, I didn't." He stepped back, his jaw tight. "You told me you hit a deer." My stomach twisted. She told him that? Emily's voice cracked. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. It was dark, I thought. "You thought it was me?" I said, finishing for her. Her eyes filled with tears. "I was scared, Hannah. Mom told me not to say anything. She said it would ruin everything." Mom's head snapped toward her. "Emily." And that was it, the last thread snapped. The truth spilled out right there in front of everyone. For a moment, I didn't move. I just stared at them. The mother who covered up a crime, the sister who left me to die, and the family that once called me too emotional whenever I dared to speak up. Then I said quietly, "I forgive you." You could have heard a pin drop. "Not because you deserve it," I continued, my voice steady now, "but because I deserve peace." Then I turned and walked out. The last thing I heard before the doors closed behind me was Emily's sob, sharp, broken, real. Outside, the air was cool and clean. The sky was a wide stretch of blue, the kind you notice only after months of staring at ceilings and hospital lights. I stood there for a long moment, breathing, letting the sunlight touch my skin. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't shaking. I didn't go back to the motel that night. I drove out of town, parked by the lake where my dad used to take us when we were kids, and just sat there watching the water ripple. It wasn't victory I felt. Not even satisfaction. It was release. The kind that hurts and heals at the same time. Still, the days after the wedding were chaos. My phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters, lawyers, even relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Apparently, one of the guests had uploaded the wedding video online. The audio was crystal clear, the confrontation raw and unfiltered. It spread like wildfire. The comments section was brutal. Some people praised me for standing up. Others said I'd ruined my sister's life. A few doubted the whole thing was real. But I didn't care. For once, people were talking about what really happened, not the polished version my mother had crafted. A week later, I got a call from a detective. "Miss Cooper," he said, his tone measured. "We'd like to discuss the details of your accident and recent revelations." I knew this was coming. I told him everything: the night of the crash, the insurance call, the recording, the wedding. When I finished, there was a pause. "We'll be reviewing the case again," he said finally. "And I can tell you now, based on the new evidence, it's likely to move forward as a criminal matter." I thanked him, hung up, and just sat there staring at my phone. It wasn't joy I felt. It was something quieter, heavier, like justice had arrived not to celebrate, but to set things right in a world that had been off balance too long. A few days later, I got a text from an unknown number.
"I'm sorry.
Please don't let them take me away." It was Emily. I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because I didn't know what to say. The girl who had driven off and left me in the dark was finally facing her own darkness. And for the first time, she couldn't hide behind Mom's protection. But the real surprise came a week after that. A lawyer contacted me, my father's old attorney, Mr. Jenkins. He said there were developments about the family home and some inheritance paperwork. Apparently, my name had been quietly removed from certain documents after the accident. "Your mother filed amendments claiming you were no longer of sound mind," he explained. "But now that the truth is public, we're challenging that on your behalf." I laughed, bitterly at first, then softly. Of course she did. When I met with him to sign some documents, he leaned across the table and said, "You know, Hannah, you handled this better than most would. Most people want revenge. You wanted clarity." He was right. I'd thought about revenge, plenty of times. But now that I had the truth, I realized revenge wouldn't give me my peace back. Only distance could. That night, I packed up what little I owned and left town for good. I didn't leave a note, didn't post an update. I just drove far enough that the radio stations changed, far enough that the air smelled like a different kind of life. It wasn't running away. It was choosing myself. A few months passed before I heard from anyone again. Emily had been charged with leaving the scene of an accident and obstruction of justice. Mom faced fines for falsifying statements. Their perfect world had crumbled. Sometimes I wondered if I should have felt pity. But then I'd remember lying on that cold asphalt, gasping for breath while they went home to dinner, and any trace of pity vanished. One morning, while sipping coffee at a quiet diner in a new town, I saw a news blurb scroll across the TV. Local woman sentenced to community service for hit-and-run incident involving her sister. Emily's photo flashed for a second. She looked smaller somehow. Fragile. I didn't finish my coffee. I just left a few bills on the table and walked outside into the morning sun. And as I stood there, watching people rush by, strangers with their own stories, their own pain, I realized something important. For years, I'd begged for love from people who couldn't give it. I'd broken myself trying to be enough for them. But the accident, the betrayal, even the humiliation, it all led me here, to a place where I didn't need their approval anymore. The truth had set me free, but not in the way I'd imagined. It didn't fix the past. It didn't make the pain disappear. It just gave me permission to stop carrying it. Months later, I got a letter in the mail, no return address, just my name written in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper. Asterisk Hannah. I see you in my dreams sometimes. I hear your voice on that recording over and over. I wish I could take it back. All of it. Mom doesn't talk to me anymore. Maybe that's what I deserve. But I hope someday you'll remember the sister I was before the accident, not the one who left you there.
I'm sorry.
Emily asterisk. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it inside my journal. Then I whispered to the air, I already forgave you. Not for her. For me. That night, I sat by the window of my small apartment, the city lights reflecting on the glass. For the first time, I didn't see the headlights that haunted me. I saw my own reflection, calm, steady, alive. I'd been hit, broken, abandoned, and silenced, but I was still standing. And sometimes, that's the greatest revenge of all. The day I was discharged from the hospital, I felt like a stranger in my own life. My body was slower, my mind heavier, and the world outside seemed cruelly unchanged. The same cars honked, the same people rushed past each other on the sidewalks, except I was no longer part of that rhythm. I moved differently, thought differently. I was 28, but I felt decades older. The doctors had told me recovery would take time, physically, emotionally, financially. What they didn't tell me was that it would also mean learning who I was without the people I'd once called family. I had been living in a temporary rehabilitation facility for 2 months after my parents kicked me out. I was supposed to be there for recovery, but every night felt like punishment, a reminder that I had no one waiting for me at home. My mom hadn't called once. My dad hadn't even checked in to see if I needed anything. And my sister? She posted smiling pictures of brunches and parties, her life looking untouched, almost brighter, as though my accident had been an inconvenience she was glad to forget. But then came the day everything began to shift, the day the truth started to find its way out. It began with a letter. Not from my family, of course, but from my insurance company. The nurse handed it to me with my afternoon medication, her voice casual as she said, "Looks official." I didn't think much of it until I opened it and read the first line. Notice of inquiry. Discrepancies in reported medical expenses submitted by family representative. My heart skipped.
I read it again.
Family representative. The document listed my name, date of birth, and claim number, and next to the line for authorized family contact, it said Laura Stevens, my mother. I blinked in disbelief. I had never given her authorization for anything beyond emergency contact information. But according to the letter, someone had been using my identity to claim reimbursements for post-accident care, care that was supposedly provided at home. Except, I hadn't been home. My stomach churned. I read further. Tens of thousands of dollars in personal rehabilitation support had been paid to my mother's account, money that was meant for my care. For a long minute, I couldn't move. The page trembled in my hands. My own mother, the woman who threw me out, who said I was a burden, had been profiting off my pain. She had used my accident as a payday. I remember sitting in that cold hospital hallway, my breath shaking, tears welling but refusing to fall. There was disbelief first, then anger, and then something deeper, a hollow ache that went beyond betrayal. It wasn't just the money. It was the confirmation that I had meant so little to her that she could exploit even my suffering. I wanted to scream, to drive to her house and demand why. But I couldn't, not yet. I didn't have the strength, the resources, or even a car. So instead, I made a decision. I would stay quiet. I would gather proof. I would let her believe I was still the broken girl lying in a hospital bed, while I slowly rebuilt myself, piece by piece. The first person I told was Nurse Carol, the one who had been helping me with therapy sessions. She was a sharp woman in her 40s, with kind eyes but zero tolerance for lies. When I showed her the letter, she didn't look surprised, just disappointed. "You'd be shocked how often family does this," she murmured, folding the paper neatly. "But the good thing? You have the truth. And truth, it has a way of coming out." Her words echoed in me for days. I started reaching out, quietly, carefully, to verify things. I contacted the insurance company, pretending I was just checking my claim progress. I requested copies of all transactions and correspondence. What I received 2 weeks later confirmed everything. Every fraudulent claim had been processed with documents signed in my name, but not by my hand. My mother's handwriting was all over them. There were fake invoices, made-up therapy logs, and even digital signatures from me. She had created a paper trail of lies that painted her as my primary caretaker. And the total? Nearly $82,000. That number hit me like another car crash. But something unexpected happened then. I didn't break down. Not this time. I felt something rise in me. Not rage, but clarity. The kind that burns slow, steady, and bright. My mother thought she had buried me beneath shame and weakness. She thought that by calling me useless, by cutting me off, she had control. But now I saw the truth. She wasn't powerful. She was terrified. Terrified of being exposed, of losing her image, of people knowing the kind of woman she really was. And I was done protecting her. The next few weeks, I began planning. Quietly, methodically. I started documenting everything. I gathered every message, every medical bill, every payment receipt. I even managed to get a copy of a voicemail she left the insurance adjuster, pretending to be me, her voice dripping with fake sweetness as she thanked them for supporting her recovery. Each night, I'd sit by the window of my small rehab room, my leg propped up, staring at the city lights. My reflection looked different now, stronger, sharper. I had been broken physically, yes, but inside, something solid was forming. Then came the moment that sealed everything. One afternoon, I got a call from an investigator from the insurance company. He wanted to meet. "We're reviewing some irregularities," he said. "It would help if we could confirm a few details with you directly." When we met at the rehab center, I told him everything. The day of the accident, being thrown out, the lack of contact from my parents. I showed him copies of the messages, the fake invoices, even her voice recording. He listened quietly, taking notes. When I finished, he said something that made my pulse race. "We'll be forwarding this for legal review. And, Ms. Stevens, it's possible this may turn into a criminal investigation." For the first time in months, I slept peacefully that night. But peace didn't last long. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was tight, trembling at the edges. "Olivia," she said, using that soft, manipulative tone I'd known my whole life. "We need to talk."
I didn't respond.
I just listened. "There's been some misunderstanding with the insurance company. They're saying you told them lies. You're confused, honey. You don't remember correctly after the accident. I only wanted to help." My hand tightened around the phone. For a moment, I almost laughed. That was her default response to everything: when caught, gaslight. When cornered, twist. I finally spoke, my voice calm. "You stole from me." There was silence on the other end. Then a hiss of defensiveness. "Don't you dare accuse me. After everything I've done." "What you've done," I interrupted, my voice shaking but steady, "is prove that I never meant anything to you unless I was useful. You wanted sympathy, money, so you made me your tragedy. You told everyone I ruined your life when all I did was survive." Her breathing was shallow. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "No," I said. "You will." And then I hung up. That was the last time I spoke to her before the truth became public. Within a month, the investigation moved forward. Subpoenas, statements, the whole thing. I didn't even have to push. The system worked for once. And soon, everyone she'd lied to, the neighbors, the relatives, the friends she'd always bragged to, started learning the truth. The woman who called me a burden had used my accident to enrich herself. The daughter she threw out was now the one being called to testify, not as a victim, but as the key witness in the case that would expose her. And when the hearing was scheduled, I made sure to be there, walking on my own 2 legs, in the courtroom where the truth would finally be spoken aloud. As I took a deep breath that morning, stepping through those heavy courthouse doors, I thought about everything: the crash, the pain, the betrayal. But I also thought about the power of standing again. And this time, I wasn't walking for her approval. I was walking toward my own justice. The courthouse smelled faintly of wood polish and anxiety. Every sound, heels tapping, papers rustling, voices murmuring, seemed amplified in my chest. My palms were sweating as I gripped the edge of my cane, the one I still needed sometimes when the pain in my hip flared up. I never imagined I'd find myself here, dressed in a navy suit borrowed from a friend, standing as the plaintiff in a fraud case against my own mother. I was 28 years old, and that day felt like the moment I'd finally grown up, because nothing ages you faster than realizing you have to stand up to the people who raised you. The trial wasn't a spectacle, not in the way you see on TV. It was quiet, clinical, and painfully methodical. The attorney representing me was patient and soft-spoken, the kind of man who didn't have to raise his voice to make his words hit hard. His questions were clear, his tone respectful. He wanted the judge to see me as what I was, a daughter betrayed. My mother sat across from me in the courtroom, her lips pressed tight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a pale pink blazer, the same one she used to wear to church, as if she thought dressing properly would make her look innocent. But her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, didn't have the warmth of a victim. They had the gleam of someone who'd lost control of her story. When the judge walked in, everyone stood. My knees trembled slightly, but I stayed tall. This was my moment to speak truth, even if it hurt. The insurance company had presented most of the evidence: bank transfers, forged documents, recorded phone calls. But when it came time for personal testimony, my attorney turned to me gently. "Miss Stevens, would you please tell the court, in your own words, how this affected your life?" I swallowed hard. For a moment, my throat closed up. But then I looked at her, my mother, and something in me hardened. "I was in a car accident 10 months ago," I began, my voice quiet but steady. "I nearly lost my life. I couldn't walk for weeks. I thought the worst thing that had happened to me was the crash itself." I paused, glancing down at my hands. But I was wrong. The worst thing was realizing that my family, the people I loved most, used my pain to profit. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. My mother's attorney objected to the tone, but the judge waved it off.
"Continue," he said.
I nodded, feeling the sting of tears behind my eyes, but refusing to let them fall. When I came home from the hospital, I thought I'd be surrounded by support, by love. Instead, I was told I was a burden. My mother threw me out. I spent months alone in a rehab center, trying to rebuild my life from nothing. I took a shaky breath. And while I was doing that, she was claiming money from my insurance, money meant for my medical care, my therapy, pretending to be my caretaker. She didn't just take money. She took my dignity, my peace, my trust. I stopped speaking for a moment, because the words were too heavy. Then, more softly, I said, "You don't recover from something like that easily. It breaks you in places you didn't know could break." When I looked up again, I saw my mother's face. For once, it wasn't composed. It wasn't calm. She was pale, her lips trembling, her hand gripping the table like she was drowning. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a confused, grieving mother who made poor financial decisions out of desperation. He even suggested she was mentally overwhelmed by the trauma of almost losing her daughter. But every time he spoke, my mother's eyes flicked toward me, angry, pleading, ashamed. It was as if she wanted me to fix this one last time, to lie, to protect her. But I didn't. When it was her turn to testify, she stood up, hands trembling slightly. Her voice cracked in the beginning, but not from sadness, from fear. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I was just trying to keep the family together. We were struggling financially. I didn't know how else to." My lawyer cut in sharply. "By stealing your injured daughter's medical funds?" She froze. "I was going to pay it back," she snapped, and just like that, the mask slipped. "You don't understand. She was draining us." I didn't even flinch. The judge's gaze narrowed, and the silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, I saw my mother not as a mother at all, but as a woman trapped by her own choices. She wasn't the monster of my childhood nightmares or the omnipotent figure I once feared. She was small,
Desperate.
human, but hollowed out by greed and pride. When the proceedings ended for the day, I walked out of the courtroom feeling lighter than I had in months. Reporters were waiting outside, cameras flashing, asking for statements. I didn't speak to them. I didn't need to. The truth was already loud enough. That night, back in my small apartment, I sat by the window again, the same way I had at the rehab center. Except this time, my body didn't ache from pain. It buzzed with release. I thought about the girl I was a year ago, trusting, naive, desperate for love that would never come. That girl would have begged for her mother's approval, even after everything.
But now?
I didn't need her forgiveness. I didn't even need her acknowledgement. I had something better: self-respect. A week later, the verdict came. The judge ruled in my favor. My mother was ordered to pay restitution, and the fraud charges moved to a higher court for review. But the money wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the sentence the judge spoke right before ending the session. Ms. Laura Stevens exploited the vulnerability of her own child for personal gain. The court recognizes this as an act of betrayal as much as it is a crime. That line echoed in my chest. An act of betrayal as much as a crime. When the gavel fell, my mother slumped in her seat. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering something, but she didn't respond. Her eyes darted to me one last time. Wild, broken, pleading. I didn't look away. Because this time, I wasn't the one who needed saving. After the case, the news spread quickly through town. The same relatives who had called me irresponsible when I got into the accident suddenly reached out with messages dripping in guilt. "We had no idea," they said. "We're so sorry." Even my sister, who had blocked me for months, texted, "I can't believe Mom did that." I didn't know. Maybe she didn't. But she didn't care enough to find out either. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on my next step, literally. My physical therapy had advanced enough that I could jog short distances again. My therapist cheered when I managed my first unassisted run, tears of pride in her eyes. "You did it," she said, grinning. "No," I whispered, breathless and smiling. "I earned it." That night, as I stood under the shower, hot water running over my scars, I finally allowed myself to cry, not from pain, but from relief. I had faced the worst kind of betrayal, and somehow, I was still standing. Weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. From my mother. It wasn't long, just a single handwritten page. "Olivia, I never thought you'd actually go through with this. You've humiliated our family. I hope you're happy now. You've destroyed everything we built. Don't contact me again." I laughed softly when I read it. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly her, twisting blame until she could feel like the victim. I folded the letter, set it in a drawer, and never opened it again. My mother might never understand what she did wrong. She might never apologize. And that's okay. Her regret wasn't mine to carry anymore. The truth had emerged, and it had set me free. And for the first time since the accident, I felt whole. Not because my body had healed completely, but because I finally knew who I was without their approval. A survivor. A fighter. A woman who chose herself. As the sun dipped below the skyline that evening, painting the sky in gold and crimson, I stood by the window, feeling the warmth on my face. For so long, I'd been defined by pain, by betrayal, by what was taken from me. But now, standing there, breathing deeply, I realized something powerful. I wasn't broken. I was reborn. It's strange how silence can sound different when you're finally at peace. The kind that used to feel like punishment now feels like calm. I used to dread quiet moments because that's when the voices in my head would come back, reminding me of everything I'd lost. But now, sitting in my new apartment surrounded by sunlight, I realized that silence can also mean freedom. It had been 6 months since the court ruling. My mother hadn't contacted me again, and I hadn't tried to. The rest of my family had gone silent too, but not before the whispers reached me, how embarrassed they were, how my mother had become the woman who stole from her daughter. Some part of me thought I'd feel triumphant when they finally saw her for who she really was. But instead, I just felt empty. Because the truth is, no amount of justice can fill the hole left by a parent's betrayal. You don't win in those situations, you just learn how to live with the scars. Still, I was healing. I had started working again, part-time at first. My old firm had reached out, offering a remote position to help me transition back. I said yes, not because I needed to prove anything to them, but because I wanted to prove it to myself. The first day I logged in and saw my name appear on the team list again, Olivia Stevens, Associate Attorney, I smiled. I had earned every bit of that title, even if it came with battle wounds most people couldn't see. My coworkers treated me kindly, but cautiously. They didn't ask questions, though I caught whispers sometimes in the hallways when I visited the office. "That's her," they'd say quietly. "The one whose mom stole from her." I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. The truth didn't shame me anymore. Instead, I poured my energy into rebuilding, not just my career, but myself. I enrolled in evening classes on trauma recovery, something I'd stumbled upon during therapy. It started as a way to understand my pain, but over time, it became something deeper. I realized I wanted to help others who had been betrayed by the very people they trusted most. Because I knew that loneliness, that hollow ache that comes from knowing you can't go home again. That summer, I volunteered at a local support group for survivors of family abuse, financial, emotional, and psychological. The first night, I sat quietly in the back, listening as others spoke. A woman in her 40s talked about her sister stealing her inheritance. A man confessed that his own son had manipulated him out of his savings. And when it was my turn, I hesitated, but then spoke. "My name is Olivia," I said softly, my voice trembling. "And my mother stole my identity and my future after my accident. But I'm here because I want to make sure no one else feels as alone as I did." The room was silent for a moment. Then, one by one, people nodded. That night, when I left, I cried in the parking lot, not out of sadness, but out of relief. For the first time, my story wasn't a wound. It was a bridge. Over the next few months, I kept volunteering. I started leading small discussions, helping others navigate the legal system, sharing the emotional lessons I'd learned the hard way. And through that, I found something I never thought I'd have again: purpose. But the universe has a way of testing your peace. It was early October when I saw her again. I was at the courthouse, attending a meeting for a victim advocacy project, when I spotted a familiar figure at the far end of the hall. My heart stopped. My mother. She looked older, much older. Her once polished blonde hair was streaked with gray, her skin pale and thin. She was wearing a cheap gray blazer, clutching a stack of documents like her life depended on them. For a moment I froze. I wasn't sure what to do: turn around and leave, or face her. But before I could decide, she saw me. Her eyes widened. For a second, I saw something flicker in them: shock, guilt, and maybe, buried deep beneath it all, regret. She hesitated, then took a shaky step toward me. "Olivia," she whispered. Her voice was softer than I remembered, almost fragile. "You look good." I said nothing. The hallway felt colder suddenly. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I work here," I said finally, my tone even. "I help people now." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. I could see her trying to form an apology, something rehearsed, but it wouldn't come out. Then, quietly, she said, "I lost the house." I nodded slowly. "I know." She looked down, ashamed. "They said I couldn't pay the restitution on time. The bank froze everything." I didn't think, her voice broke. I didn't think it would come to this. Something inside me stirred, not anger this time, but something sadder, heavier. She had destroyed her life chasing control, and now, standing before me, she looked like the ghost of her own pride. "I'm not here to hurt you, Mom," I said softly. "But I'm not here to save you either." Her eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted you to know, I never stopped loving you." I took a deep breath. "Maybe you believe that," I said. "But love without respect isn't love, it's control."
"You didn't love me."
"You wanted to own me." She flinched, her face crumpling like paper. "Please, Olivia, But I stopped her with a small shake of my head. "It's too late for that." For a moment, We just stood there, two broken pieces of a story that could never be put back together. When I turned to leave, she whispered, "I'm proud of you." I paused, but I didn't look back. That was the last time I saw her. Weeks later, I heard she'd moved in with a cousin 2 towns over, living quietly, out of the public eye. I didn't chase after her. I didn't need closure from her anymore, because I had already found it within myself. By winter, I'd officially launched a nonprofit called Rise Again, an organization dedicated to helping victims of family exploitation rebuild their independence. The irony wasn't lost on me, that something born from my deepest pain could become a source of strength for others. The day I received the grant approval for my first community project, I celebrated alone with a cheap bottle of sparkling cider and a laugh that felt like victory. Standing on my balcony, wrapped in a wool coat, I looked up at the stars. I thought about the accident, the crash that started everything. How a single moment of chaos had shattered my body, my family, and my illusion of love. But it also gave me clarity. It forced me to see who people truly were when everything else was stripped away. It showed me that family isn't defined by blood, but by compassion.
By choice.
A week before Christmas, I visited the rehab center where I'd learned to walk again. The nurses remembered me. They hugged me, laughed, and showed me around the new wing that had been built. I donated part of my first grant to help fund new therapy equipment, and as I stood watching a young woman learning to walk with a brace, tears filled my eyes. She looked up and smiled at me, that fierce, determined kind of smile that said I won't give up. And in that moment, I saw myself, not the broken, abandoned version my family had thrown away, but the woman I had fought to become. That night, as I sat by the window, the same way I had so many nights before, I realized how far I'd come. The scars on my leg, the ache in my hip, the memories, they were all still there. But they didn't define me anymore. I picked up my journal and wrote 3 words across the page. They lost me, because that was the truth. My family hadn't just lost their daughter when they cast me out. They'd lost their chance at redemption, their chance to love me honestly. And I, somehow, had found everything they never could.
Strength. Purpose. Peace.
As the clock struck midnight and soft snow began to fall outside, I whispered into the quiet, "I forgive you, but I'll never forget." Not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. Because forgetting would mean erasing the lessons that rebuilt my life, and I had earned every single one. I stood up, turned off the lamp, and walked toward the window, watching the city glow under the falling snow. I wasn't broken anymore. I was free.